The Rangers of Middle-earth are one of the most secretive factions, an elite group of warriors skilled in the arts of stealth and ambush. Though both the Rangers of the North and the Rangers of Ithilien were often referred to as the Rangers, these two factions differed immensely in their culture, history, and the roles they played in the lands of Middle-earth. Hey guys, it's Carl here, and in today's video we'll be delving into the history and customs of these two different ranger groups, those of the North and those of Ithilien. So the Rangers of the North were descendants of the Dunedain of the northern kingdom of Arnor, which had once occupied vast amounts of lands between the Misty Mountains and the Blue Mountains. This kingdom would meet a tragic end at the hands of the Witch King, who devastated its lands and massacred most of its people. And after the death of their last king, called Arvedui, the Dunedain of the North abandoned their kingship, and Arvedui's son, called Arnor, became their first chieftain. The loss of their kingdom caused the Dunedain to become a shadow of their past glory, for their numbers had dwindled significantly, and their lands were occupied by other factions. And so, the Dunedain grew to be a secret and wandering people, and they became known as the Rangers of the North. The heirlooms of the northern kingdom of Arnor, such as the Ring of Barahir, the Shards of Narsil, the Star of Elendil, and the Scepter of Annúminas, were given to Elrond for safekeeping in the year 1976 of the Third Age, and Aranor's son, called Arahil, was sent to Rivendell, where he was fostered by Elrond. This would start a new tradition, in which all the sons of the chieftains of the Dunedain were also fostered and grew up in Rivendell. Now over the years, the blood of Numenor seemed to diminish at a faster rate in the lands of Gondor than those of the North, and so the Rangers of the North had a longer lifespan than their southern kinsmen. For the most part, the chieftains of the Dunedain would live long lives, though their lands and people would often face troubles and hardships, and some of the chieftains' lives would end in tragedy. In the year 2327 of the Third Age, their fifth chieftain called Aragorn was killed by wolves in Eriador, and during the rule of Arahad, their seventh chieftain, an army of orcs that had secretly occupied the Misty Mountains descended from their strongholds into the lands of Eriador, and they attempted to occupy and block its passes. These orcs would be defeated, and they were forced to retreat back into the Misty Mountains, and it's very likely that the Rangers played a crucial part in this victory. For the next 100 years, the orcs of the Misty Mountains recovered their strength, and they would descend once more from their strongholds during the reign of King Arasuel, the 11th chieftain of the Dunedain. These orcs ravaged the lands of Eriador, and though the Rangers of the North and the Sons of Elrond would succeed in defeating them, some of the orcs managed to slip past their defenses, and they reached the lands of the Shire, where they were driven back by a group of hobbits led by Bandobras Took. Now Eriador was the 14th chieftain of the Dunedain and Aragorn's grandfather, and he succeeded his father as chieftain in the year 2912 of the Third Age, though his reign was short-lived, for he was captured and killed by a group of hill trolls in the Coldfells north of Rivendell after only 18 years of rule. His son Arathorn would succeed him as chieftain, and he chose to marry Gilrin the Fair, who was also a descendant of the first chieftain of the Dunedain, and after 1 year into their marriage, their son Aragorn was born. Arathorn would suffer a tragic end, just like his father, and 3 years after his marriage, he rode out with the sons of Elrond to hunt some orcs, and during one of their battles, an orc arrow pierced his eye and slew him. Now at the time of his death, his son Aragorn was still very young, being only 2 years old, and his mother took him to Rivendell, and they lived together for a while in the house of Elrond. Since Sauron was seeking out the heirs of Isildur, they chose to hide Aragorn's true identity and heritage from him to ensure his safety, and they named him Estel, which meant hope. Elrond would come to love Aragorn as a son, and he grew up to be a great warrior and man, and when he was 20 years old, Elrond called him by his true name, and to reveal to him everything about his heritage. He also gave him the heirlooms of his house, such as the Shards of Narsil and the Ring of Barahir, though Elrond chose to keep the Scepter of Annúminas until Aragorn earned it by becoming the King of Gondor and Arnor. Now before I discuss the role that the Rangers of the North played in the War of the Ring, I'd like to go over other parts of their history, culture, and lifestyle. So the Rangers lived lonely and hard lives, wandering the wild lands even as far as the Misty Mountains. They were taller and darker than the men of Bree, and they wore rusty green, brown, and grey clothing, along with a dark green cloak that was pinned to their shoulder by a brooch in the form of a silver-rayed star, called the Star of the Dunedain. Their clothing provided them with excellent cover and camouflage in the wilds, and their nomadic lifestyle made them experts of the fauna and creatures of the northern lands. This knowledge allowed them to survive in the wild by finding food such as berries and roots, or herbs for healing such as atillas. They were also great huntsmen and exceptional trackers with a heightened sense of sight and hearing, and it was said that the Rangers were able to understand the language of beasts and birds. The Rangers also tried to maintain what they could of their past lore and history, for we know that the Palantiri were still remembered in a rhyme of lore among the Dunedain of the north. Now the Rangers were known to sometimes travel and camp in Deadman's Dyke, which was the ruins of Fornost, the ancient capital city of Arnor. Another common camping spot was Weathertop, which was also a ruin from their past, and its height provided them with a good vantage point to look over and maintain vigilance over the surrounding lands. The Rangers of the North were also known to sometimes use runes to leave messages and communicate with each other. When they weren't traversing the wilds of Eriador, they would occasionally rest at the Prancing Pony in Bree, and they brought with them news from faraway lands and strange forgotten tales that were eagerly listened to. Bree also served as a hub for many other travelers across the lands, and by staying there, the Rangers could probably hear news that was of importance to them in regards to the safety of Eriador. Now the people of Bree did not befriend the Rangers, for they regarded them with suspicion and distrusted them. They were often treated scornfully, yet despite this poor treatment, the Rangers still took care of these people and kept their land safe, even though this went largely unappreciated. Perhaps the Rangers kept this vigilance since these lands had once been a part of the Kingdom of Arnor, or maybe it was simply out of the goodwill of their hearts. Now the life of a ranger did not only consist of traveling and surviving in the wilds, for they would also ride out and hunt down evil creatures. Without them, the lands of Eriador would have known very little peace, for when evil creatures crept out of the hills and woods, it was the Rangers that held them at bay and kept the surrounding villages safe. These creatures should not be underestimated, for according to Aragorn, there were foes that lived merely a day's march away from Bree that could destroy the village and leave it in ruins, if it was not for the constant vigilance of the Rangers. While hunting and in battle, the Rangers would often use a spear, bow and sword, a clear indication of their versatility and adaptability, and Gandalf was a close friend of their people, sending messages and asking for their aid in times of need. In fact, around 17 years before the events of The Lord of the Rings, many evil spies such as beasts and birds started to gather around the Shire, and Gandalf reached out to the Rangers asking them for help, and they doubled their watch and guard over this land. Gandalf would also seek out Aragorn to help him to find and capture Gollum, and together they managed to trace his path and capture and interrogate him. In the year 2018 of the Third Age, on the 22nd of September, the Nazgul attacked the Rangers that stood watch on the southern borders of the Shire in an area called Sarn Ford, and the Rangers were unable to hold them back, and the survivors were forced to flee eastwards. 4 of the Nazgul pursued them for a short while, before turning aside to watch over the Greenway Road, and the Rangers' defeat allowed Camul the Ringgreat to enter the Shire through its southern borders. After Gandalf returned as Gandalf the White, he brought with him a message from Galadriel for Aragorn, telling him that the time was approaching for the Dunedain of the North to come forth and join Aragorn on the paths of the dead. In fact, Galadriel sent out a message to the Rangers of the North, telling them that Aragorn needed their help and that they should ride out to find him in Rohan. 30 of the Rangers of the North would answer these summons, led by a ranger called Halbarad, and they were known as the Grey Company. It might seem like a small number, though it was all they could gather in haste, and Halbarad brought with him a standard that Arwen had created for Aragorn in secret. Now these rangers had a lordly and strong appearance similar to Aragorn, and they shared a strong bond with their horses, who loved them so dearly that they were willing to follow their masters into the paths of the dead. After Aragorn secured the allegiance of the Oathbreakers, the Grey Company rode swiftly to Pelargir, where they defeated the Corsairs of Umbar and boarded their ships. During this battle, Aragorn sent one of the Dunedain to each of the great ships to comfort and free the slaves that were upon it, and together they set sail to join the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. When they arrived at the battlefield, Halbarad unfurled the standard that bore the White Tree of Gondor and the signs of Elendil, though tragically he would be slain in this battle. The rangers that survived would join Aragorn in his attack upon the Black Gate, and they formed part of the vanguard, and they were later present for Aragorn's coronation in Gondor. Now it seems that when the rangers traveled to the south to help Aragorn, very few of them were left to protect the northern lands, and this allowed many evil creatures and men to creep in and terrorize its people. The once bustling town of Bree now lay quiet and wary, for countless strangers had entered their lands through the Greenray Road, and some of them were evil and mischievous, committing acts of murder and theft. The roads were no longer safe, and bandits would attack unarmed folk, robbing them of their goods. Worst of all were the wolves that would creep around the fences of Bree at night, howling as they sought out prey, and dark dreadful shapes were seen wandering in the woods nearby. These evil creatures and men were driven out when the rangers returned, and the northern lands would be at peace once more. Some of the people of Bree, such as Barlam and Butterbur, would finally start to appreciate and truly understand how much the rangers used to help and protect them from the evils that surrounded their lands. After Aragorn's coronation, the northern kingdom of Arnor and the southern kingdom of Gondor were reunited, and Elrond gave him the scepter of Annúminas. Under his rule, the ancient cities of the Rangers such as Fornost and Annúminas were restored, and so it would seem that the Rangers didn't remain a wandering people. It's incredible that despite all the hardships that the Northern Kingdom faced, the line of kings would go unbroken, from father to son for so many generations. It is also sad to know that after Elrond left the lands of Middle-earth, a lot of the history of the Rangers of the North was lost forever, for they had been a secret people, and there were very few beings left alive, such as Elrond, who knew of their deeds and history. So now, I'd like to discuss the Rangers of Ithilien. So these Rangers were probably established soon after the year 2901 of the Third Age, during the stewardship of Túrin II. For in this year, an army of orcs came out of Mordor and attacked the lands of Ithilien, and many of Ithilien's people abandoned their homes and fled to Minas Tirith. Under Túrin's orders, several secret areas of refuge were built for his soldiers in Ithilien, including Henet Anun, which was the one that was guarded for longest, and it was still being used towards the end of the Third Age. Now during the events of the War of the Ring, the Rangers of Ithilien were handpicked by Denethor II, from descendants of the people that had once lived in Ithilien before it was overrun. These men were led by Faramir, the son of Denethor, and they would cross the River Anduin through secret paths to ambush the armies of Sauron that roamed between the Mountains of Shadow and the River Anduin. Frodo would come across these rangers on one such mission, when they had sallied forth to ambush a regiment of Haradrim that was traveling towards Mordor. Now these rangers wore brown and green clothing and gauntlets, along with green hoods and masks, and this provided them with the perfect camouflage for the lands of Ithilien. They were armed with spears, great bows and swords, and their strength did not lie in numbers or outright battle, for Faramir's company only consisted of around 300 men or so, but rather in surprise, ambush, and knowledge of the lands. Once these rangers successfully attacked their enemies, they would flee back across the Anduin before Sauron could send out an army after them, and so it's clear that their attacks mostly consisted of hit-and-run tactics. Now following their victory over the Haradrim, Faramir led his company, along with Sam and Frodo, to the refuge of Henet Anun on the 7th of March, and to protect and ensure its secrecy, the hobbits were blindfolded while they journeyed towards this area. No orcs or servants of Sauron had ever found this refuge yet, and it was an ideal defensive location, for its layout would allow its defenders to hold off much greater numbers with a small force. Now whenever the Rangers camped in Henet Anun, they would perform a tradition before their evening meal, in which they would turn and face the west for a moment in silence, looking towards Numenor and the Undying Lands. Many of these Rangers still bore the proud features of Numenor, having grey eyes and dark hair, and at times they spoke in Elvish to each other. Now earlier, Faramir had sent out some of his keenest huntsmen to find and capture Gollum, though he managed to avoid them. However, later that night, the Rangers spotted Gollum in the pools of Henet Anun, and Faramir would choose to spare him, after Frodo vouched for him and promised to keep him in his care. Now before the siege of Minas Tirith, Faramir sent out his Rangers to Osgiliath to strengthen its defenses, and he would later join them to lead his men. These Rangers would also take part in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, and after Faramir's injury at the hands of a Nazgul, a ranger called Mablung took command of their company, and they formed part of Aragorn's assault on the Black Gate. Thanks to the Rangers' skills and their knowledge of the lands, the forces of the West managed to locate an ambush of orcs and Easterlings that was lying in wait for them, and they turned the trap on itself and defeated them. Now we don't know what happened to these Rangers after Sauron's defeat, whether they still remained active or if they were disbanded, though I'd like to believe that they formed part of Faramir's White Company after he was granted the title of Prince of Ithilien. I think it would be awesome if these men that were so devoted to him could still guard and protect him, and I feel this role would be quite appropriate, for it would allow them to return to the lands of their forefathers once again. I'd like to hear your thoughts on these two factions, and which one you'd prefer to be more. Would you rather be a Ranger of the North and a kinsman of Aragorn, or a Ranger of Ithilien that kept the lands of Gondor safe? I'd also like to mention that a fellow Lord of the Rings YouTuber called Men of the West will also be covering this topic later this week, for we happen to be working on the same thing simultaneously. So keep an eye open for it and send him some love from the geek community. Anyway friends, this wraps up today's video and I hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested, check out our Facebook, Twitter, Patreon, Discord, Instagram, and some of our affiliate links in the video description. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to join our fellowship today. I hope to see you all in my next video, where together we'll once again explore the magical world and lore of Middle-earth.